fear thy name, fear and tremble before thy word. And I also pray for good upcoming service. Be with our preacher, and bless his preacher as well. Lord, we ask this in Christ Jesus' name. Amen.
Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17, or actually a little phrase from verse 17. And I was looking, actually early this morning, thinking, we probably only have 3 or 4 lessons left. I don't know what we're going to do next. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 17, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. Now, we've spent weeks going through this picture of the armor of God. And when you get to verse 17, well, verse 17 caused me a lot of issues. At first look at verse 17, and take the helmet of salvation. I love that. Doc, good to see you this morning. I love that phrase because to me it brings out this idea that salvation is more than just heaven when we die. And too often, that's what we think. Salvation, I need salvation, so I have the golden ticket to get to the golden gate, to get past so I can get in, and that's really all that salvation, kind of is. And sometimes that's how we picture it. Are you saved? Okay, so you get in. Now we move on. But Justin, in this verse, it makes salvation an integral part of our daily defense against the enemy. Salvation is a huge part of this armor. This armor is his strength. This armor is what's going to allow us to stand. So it's more than that. So I read it and I get all excited and I'm like, I'm so glad to be saved because it makes this possible. But then you go through and now it's time to prepare a lesson. And VP, you start to prepare a lesson and this is the only words I got. And take the helmet of salvation. And so you get ready. And I once heard a speaker talk about dealing with the tough passage. And it starts to become a tough passage. And I probably made it tougher on myself. But this is how he describes it. All right, take a blank sheet of paper. Justin, this is what you do. Take a blank sheet of paper, set it down at a desk, and then think about everything and make sure it fits in context before you write it down. Well, this is what happens. This is how you know it's a tough passage. Because 30 minutes later, you know what you still have on the desk? A blank sheet of paper. And you know what happens? Pretty soon it's Tuesday. And you have... I finally found a question Brother Wayne can answer. And it's Wednesday. And you know what you have? And Thursday. And you know what you have on Thursday? You're nervous because Sunday's coming. And so what usually happens is then, and this is his comment, is you start to build a lesson around it. Things you know around the topic. You don't technically just deal with it in its phrase, in its topic, right there. And so, I'm sitting there, and this is what I would have. Miss Myrna, this is what I have, a blank sheet of paper. And so I said, well, let's cross-reference this, and let's go and take a look at some people who I respect and see what they wrote or what they've said about it. And this is what I found out. Doc, this is what I found out. They spoke around it. Okay, and usually what happens is they'll come to this verse, and by the time you get to this verse, they just do it let's do a rephrase and remember, and you have an enemy, and we have an armor, and God loves us. That's good. Be encouraged. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's very important. We need to know we have an enemy, and God's provided for us an armor, and we need to be encouraged. We are the victors. It's very important. But it doesn't really deal with this phrase in context. So you keep looking, and then this is what I found. Mrs. Hank. Everybody who didn't deal with it that way, that I looked at, they tend to deal with it this way. Well, let's talk about salvation as an evangelism, and the world needs to be saved, and that's very good. And that's very important, and that's a great study. That's a great study. We would love to study that. Although it always makes us feel bad because we need to do more. And so it's fun. But that doesn't fit in context. Because if you go back to where this book began, which was probably a year ago, it begins this way. Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ, by the will of God, to the saints which are at Ephesus, they would already be saved. And... Well, see, Brother Jeremy, people are going to read this after that because God knew it was the Word of God. And so, okay, this is covered. And to the faithful in Christ Jesus. This book is written to those who are already saved. So, Matt, when I start to think about this, okay, we need to take the helmet of salvation. To me, that almost seems like wasted words, okay? Because what do we know? Paul tells us things like we have a guarantee that we're sealed, that we're kept. No, that's not Paul, that's John. No man shall pluck me from his hands. He tells us these things. He tells us that we're adopted in the beloved. We're part of the family, that this never changes. Matt, if we're saved, always saved, and we still have to put on the helmet, this means that I can be saved and not protected. Justin, that's a different picture. That doesn't fit the nice, fluffy picture. That doesn't fit the nice challenge, let's help them. That's written to us. So I'm not so sure. Well, if that wasn't true, he wouldn't be telling the saved to take on the helmet. This statement gets a little tough. And it's really important. I was going to bring, there's Eric. I was actually going to bring your helmets. So you start to think about it. We've got to take on the helmet. I've got 3 helmets in the garage that used to belong, Donnie, 3 that used to belong to Eric. They're very important, Jade. You should take them to the house at one point. One of them's a football helmet. It has the face mask literally crushed over to the side. If he didn't have a helmet, he wouldn't have such a pretty face, because that thing would have been demolished. Maddie has another one that's cracked at the top. I don't know what to say about that one. If he didn't have that one, he'd be dumber than he already is. And then very special, we have one put in a huge plastic bag from where he was riding his bike and got hit by a truck. The helmet is very important because what it protects is the head. So when he's writing here that, okay, we need to take on the helmet, very first thing we know, okay, is that we need to take on the helmet to protect the head. And it's important that we protect the head because we have an enemy. The very moment we get saved, the very moment we're reconciled to God, we receive a declaration of war from his enemy. To be a follower of Jesus is to be instantaneously introduced to spiritual warfare. Now, who wants to go to war? Who's going to play a football game without a helmet? If I show you these 2 helmets, you're not going to do that. In fact, if I show you this other one, you're going to be making sure every one of your children wear a helmet to ride a bike. Because we need protection. We have an enemy, and he's attacking us. And how does he attack? Where does he attack? He attacks here. Let's see, what do we call him? He's the accuser. He's the deceiver. He twists things. Where does the attack happen? The battle is here. And so he says, put on this helmet. Okay, but then, Ben, this is where it gets hard. So I want to put all this down on my blank sheet of paper, right? I'm getting ready. But then I'm thinking, I put all this down on the blank sheet of paper, but we're already victors. Doc, are we not already victors? This is already over. I mean, we're talking about war and warfare and battle, but this is all already done. He's already the loser. We signed up on the winning side. So I'm pretty certain, Brother Hamilton, this belongs on my blank sheet of paper. But if I'm going to put this down on the blank sheet of paper, I have to deal with this fact. So here's the only picture I've ever really heard that makes sense. I'm not a great chess player. My dad was a great chess player, which meant if I played, I would lose. So I didn't play much chess. I tried for a little while because I was going to become good and then come beat him. You know, that's what every kid wants to do. But the few times I tried, I never beat him. So I quit because he was a bad winner. Every time he wanted to provoke, now your children to ask Dad. But I did learn this, that when he would look at me and smile and chuckle and make fun of me and do whatever he had to do, sometimes he even did a victory dance, and say, checkmate. There was still a move, sometimes 2 moves I could have made. But it didn't matter if I would have made any moves. It was done. And that's kind of the time we're living in. We have an eternal God. He's not cased inside of time. Jaded, eternally, it's over. He's already won. But if we try to fit it into time we live, it's checkmate. Okay, it's checkmate. He may have a few moves left that he can do, but the battle is over. We are on the victor's side. But Justin, in those moves, we need to have the helmet on. And that helmet is to protect our mind. It's to protect the brain. Because that is inevitably where his attack comes. And so first thing down on the piece of paper, it is the importance of the Christian mind. See all that stuff that comes in after the paper's filled in. Right now you got to get that phrase, you got to get that outline. And the very beginning is we have to have the helmet because the Christian mind is important. It is important. And this might sound silly, Miss Myrna. But before you even start, it's important what to think and where to think. And I think we have to realize, Rob, we have to realize this. It is important that we be thinkers. You know, too often we paint Christianity as this idea of, well, I don't have an answer for all of that. You just need to believe. John, you have to believe in something. The accusation against the church, against Christianity, comes out like this. The world says things like, here we go. We're non-thinking, and I just went through and Googled it. This is the thing. Christians are accused of being non-thinking, weak-minded, fable-believing, gullible. In fact, the statement is, you must turn your brain off to be a Christian. Okay, Brother Wayne, it's good because that's ridiculous to me. But I can't tell you how many Christians would truthfully believe with that. Well, that's true, but I just believe. How do you know? What do you believe in? We're supposed to be able to give every man an answer. Justin, the only reason you can give every man an answer, the only reason he would ask that of us is because we can, and that's because he calls us to think. In fact, it's our enemy who doesn't want us to think. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 tells us about our enemy, and he says, this is his battle plan. Blind the minds so that they can't see the truth. 2 Corinthians chapter 10 challenges us. We need to keep every thought captive because he has strongholds that keeps us from seeing and living out the truth. He's the one that calls us to be gullible and not to think. When I take a look at the Bible over and over and over again wants me to think. When I was younger, two of my favorite books were, and I'm going to talk about one of them because if you have it, I want it back. I'm not a big Tim LaHaye fan, but he has two books that I really like. One is called The Battle for the Mind. That's this one. The other one is called Anger, Anger, Anger. Anger is a choice. But Battle for the Mind is a great book. When I once had it, this is going to tell you, see, this Max is going to tell you how crazy it gets when I'm starting to get old. Okay, I remember the first book. I loaned it to Big Jim Evans, whose car was stolen. And when it was stolen, the book was in his car. And so, I'm like, ugh. So I didn't want to make him feel bad, Doc, so I started to find one. It's out of print. It's not easy to find. So I found one, got it. And as soon as I got it in the mail, the next day Jim showed up and said, hey, I felt bad, so here, I got you one. So I had two. But this last week when I went on the shelf, now I remember all of that. I can even look up and find where I got the copy from. But this week when I went to go get it off the shelf, both are gone, and I can't remember who I loaned them to. So if you're one of them, please just slip it over in that chair back there. It's a great book. The other book is by John Stott, and it's called Your Mind Matters. And in that book, kind of intros, and I couldn't find that one either, but at least that one's only one, and who knows when I loaned it out, and who knows how long it's been gone. But in that, he starts this book with this picture. It's like a conversation between two friends. And Brother Moyer, what he's talking about is our world, he makes this statement, our world, our society has given birth to two ugly twins. Now, okay, Brother Jeremy, you're just talking, I'm like, no. Our society has given birth to two ugly twins. Okay, those two twins are mindlessness, not thinking, and meaninglessness. Futile, wasted life of no account, which, by the way, are the two things they accuse the church. The church doesn't think, and you're just wasting your life. I'm gonna run out of time, but yesterday, Angie made me do all this work in the backyard. She's such a slave driver. She's not here. I'm just such a victim. She won't believe you. So I come in the house, and the TV's on PBS, which is more torture. But I don't know who put it on there, so I didn't want to change it. So I'm just like sitting there. And on there comes this artiste from California it's like some craft show, so I probably know who put it on. And it's some craft show, and she's talking about her jewelry, and she throws this thing in there. And then she's taken like plastic bags and shredded them, and it's like grass growing off of there. And look, and she's talking about, how she raised her 2 children to have meaning in the world. And I'm sitting there listening to their accomplishments, and I'm just, what a nutcase. And then she starts actually going, and she starts attacking people who aren't trying to change the world into true meaninglessness. And I just thought, really, that is what they think. That's what they think of every Christian. That our life is of no purpose. That we're wasting the opportunity to what? To enjoy life to the fullest, and then I start thinking, I've never heard of this lady before. I won't even remember her name in the morning, which was true. I can't remember the name of her kids. What change did she cause in the world outside of saving a few plastic bags from being thrown away or recycled? And I guarantee you that jewelry has since been thrown away. But that is what we're accused of. And John starts this picture, and he says, we have 2 ugly twins, not thinking and no purpose. And then he said, you're going to say, how does that happen? Justin, how does that happen? How did the world revolve into this? Well, this is kind of how the whole, we're not focused on the meaninglessness, doesn't fit our verses. But the no thinking definitely does. And this is how it happens. You and I, we go out, and we just start talking about how bad the world is. I mean, we just bemoan things until we're overwhelmed with all negative thought, and it's just so terrible. But then me, being the good one, I want to try to help you. So I say something like, Justin, you need to be more philosophical in this life. You need to quit worrying so much. You need to quit troubling yourself so much. You saying, all right, how do I do that? Well, just quit thinking about it. And that's what's happened to our society. We've just quit thinking. We just accept a statement that's made. We don't check anything. We don't think anything. We don't follow up on anything. I have recently started watching, and I'm going to give you this. I wrote it down. This thing on YouTube. It's a Christian archaeologist. It's called Expedition Bible. You listening, VP? Expedition Bible. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And the more I watch it, the more I have to be careful not to get angry. Because the things he's bringing out have been known for 150 years. And how they're being hidden. I'll give you, if you look at any search, one of the great attacks against the Bible attacks the legitimacy of King David. Okay. Next to Jesus Christ himself, David, Moses, you're going to have a tough time arguing over who's more important in the Old Testament. I mean, there's such a huge picture. Okay. Brother Moyer, the argument comes out, the Bible builds all this around David, and we've got no historical proof of King David. No proof of David. And I am not stretching this to tell you I have read that in statements 100 times. And Matt, I've actually, it's just one of those things that I didn't have an answer for. Doc, I didn't have an answer for, so I just kind of like this. Well, let's switch the subject and talk about something else. Let's attack it from another point of view. So I'm watching this guy, and just in the last 2 weeks, he brought out these things. First, he goes back to over 70 years ago, the city of David, which is inside Jerusalem, was excavated. Okay, and this is what happened. A guy said, if the Bible is true, then it ought to be a reliable treasure map. That makes sense, right? If it's true, it ought to be a reliable treasure map. And so in the early excavations, they can find like the corners of the original wall. And so this is what he did. He went to 1 Kings, where it says King David was going to be buried in the city of David. Well, that limits it to an 11-acre spot. The city of David is 11 acres. Boom. Jerusalem has grown around it, but the original city of David is 11 acres. So he said that limits it to 11 acres. Then he found a verse in Nehemiah that starts talking about the families and the pictures of the wall, the places of the wall that they're supposed to build. So he goes to this family, and then it goes to the third section of the wall, coming from the south corner north. And it said, and this picture of the wall was built across from the place where David was buried. So he marked it X, and he went right there, based off the book of Nehemiah, and he hired 200 people, and they moved earth. Basically created a little mountain underneath it. I'm pretty sure they found tombs. Now, this is why we don't hear about it. Because the world says, well, that was just a cemetery inside the city. There's like 11 tombs, I think. But you know that can't be. Because you know what the Bible tells the Jews? That you can't put a cemetery inside the city. It has to be outside the city. The only that can be buried inside the city are the rulers of that city. Hence, every single one of these tombs has to be a king. And if you go off of the book of Nehemiah, directly from this wall is what they called T1, probably the tomb of David. Now, this is 70, 80 years ago. How do I not know this? Because you know what happens to know this? Makes us thankful people. And, well, if it's reliable, it's reliable. If you mark on a treasure map, you find a treasure. That's a good treasure map. So I watched it, and there's a couple more things. You can tell I'm going to talk about this because I want you to go watch it. But over 70 years ago, they found some scrolls in old Babylon. Doc, do you realize that in these old scrolls, the name of Jehoiachin is mentioned? This is how it's mentioned. Jehoiachin of the house of David. This is important for two reasons. One, because the house of David should have never gone away, and so you need a remnant. You need someone living. Second, it gives validity to Jehoiachin being carried away in the captivity. And third, it talks about the house of David, mentioned in history. Talked about the Moabite stone, which was found in 1868. It sets in the Louvre. It mentions the house of David. It talks about 2 Kings 3:4. The whole thing that happens in 2 Kings is talked about on this Moabite stone. And it mentions the name Yahweh. The God of the Israelites, Yahweh, and the house of David. Of course, he's bragging about destroying it, which he was wrong, but... when we... Actually, the Moabite stone is a great study. They tried to destroy the stone. They literally heated it up, poured cold water on it, burst it into pieces, and the archaeologist in 1868 wanted it so bad, he went to every of the families and purchased them one piece at a time. And if he couldn't purchase it, he purchased a relief of it, got permission from them for amount of money, and then it was rebuilt, and it sits in the Louvre Museum today. Rich, how do I not know this? We have bought the lie that we don't have answers and that we're people that's not supposed to think. We'll say, I'm not supposed to be gullible. But we almost accept, okay, I'll just accept it without reason, without thought. But God says to his people, come now, let us reason together. In fact, the opposite of the enemy who wants to blind their eyes. Romans chapter 2 tells us not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of the mind. Isaiah chapter 26, he'll keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed. It's a focused mind. Matthew chapter 22. Brother Hank, you know I love this verse. That we should love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our... It's not left out. This is supposed to be a choice. It is a decision. We decide based on this, that this is what I love. This is the answer. It's not emotional mumbo jumbo. Philippians chapter 4 gives us a whole list. If it's true, if it's honorable, if it's pure, if it's just, think on these things. Do not turn your brain off. Christians are to think. Paul would write to Timothy and tell Timothy, Timothy, you do not have the spirit of fear, but of a sound mind. Set, focused, decided. 1 Peter would write that if we're going to be prepared for action in this life, we need to be a people who are sober-minded. We're not willy-nilly. We're not controlled by emotion. We're not bouncing out there of fear. In fact, back in Ephesians, Paul would start out in Ephesians chapter 1, and let's see, verse 13. In whom ye also trusted, after that ye heard the word of the truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also after that ye believed. All right, so here's this picture. Get this picture. Miss Martin, you ready? You get this picture. First you hear it. Then you have to ponder it. And after you think on it, you decide to believe in it. And after you believe that it's true, which you don't believe that it's true until you have to you review it and you think on it. See, belief and trust, they're decisions of the mind. I listen to the preacher, and I choose to believe that he is right. Now, if he's right, and I believe he's right, that changes my actions. All of this is done in the thinking. Paul, when talking about our salvation, right before he says we're sealed, said this all happens because you heard, thought, decided, believed, and trust in it. It's now the thing that affects all of your decisions during the day. So when he would talk about putting on the helmet, this is not getting saved. This is living out that salvation. This is thinking. This is basing your decisions on the fact of that salvation. So first, we need to be thinking people. Jess and I probably have a list of pet peeves. I can't think of very many of them right now. But I can tell you, definitely on that list is being pictured as someone who must be gullible and put my brain up to be a Christian. Because it's in fact the opposite. Satan blinds the minds of the world so that they can't see the truth of the gospel, and that's why evolution makes sense to them. Okay? That's why humanism makes sense to them. They start out by saying, oh, this is all gullible, you have to be silly. And then they turn right around and they say, okay, the world, it's all right, maybe it's not gullible, but maybe religion has some good things. You see what they just did? They just made Christianity a religion. Maybe religion has some good things, and they all need to be the same. We need to treat them all the same. They all have value. Man is basically good, and we'll all end up in the same place. Well, Kent, here I'm going to tell you, put on your helmet and think about that, because that's not true. The power in the helmet is the truth of salvation. And we need to be called to think deeply, which will result in us feeling deeply, but what we need to think about is salvation. Now, we could go back through the entire book of Ephesians, well, the first 3 chapters anyway. Because, Justin, Paul spent 3 chapters trying to paint the picture for us of our salvation. But we have 10 minutes, so we're going to try to do this quickly, which means go to Romans. Romans chapter 3. Because there are some things we need to know about our salvation. Thinking rightly about our salvation is part of our protection, man. He attacks us in the mind. The battle to keep him away is knowing rightly about our salvation. In Romans chapter 1, all the way basically through to chapter 3, verse 20, Paul, much like in Ephesians, is setting the need. This is one section. And in this section, he sets the need of mankind for salvation. A couple verses, chapter 3, verse 10 through 12. As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none that understandeth. There is none that seeketh after God. They are all gone out of the way. They are all together become unprofitable. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. So here you go. Here's the verdict on humanity. Ready, Matt? Verdict on humanity. all sinners. Okay, now we go a little bit further in this passage. Go down to verse 20, chapter 3, verse 20, and we start to get the sentence. Therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. For by the law is the knowledge of sin. Verse 21. But now, the righteousness of God without the law is manifested. That is a great phrase. Okay, because all the way up to that phrase, Brother Wayne, sin, sinners, hopeless, but now is manifested, now is made apparent, now is possible. Now, right here in this verse, we have hope. But now the righteousness of God without the law is made manifested, being witnessed by the law and the prophets, even the righteousness of God, which is by going to church, by doing right, by faith of Jesus Christ unto all and upon all them that believe, for there is no difference. For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Verse we all know. So he establishes the need for salvation. He gives us the verdict that all humanity are sinners. And then in verse 20, 21, 22, 23, he makes a means, a way of redemption. And that gets us to a picture. And this is, we're running out of time, but it is important that we understand our salvation is more than a ticket. It is important we understand preacher, almost every other week, you're going to say something like, the salvation he purchased with his own blood. The salvation's where he sacrificed himself. I truly believe this. There are people out here who sat right there and say, yeah, but he was God. Did he have to? Okay, he chose to do it that way. We instantly start to demean what he has done for us because we don't understand salvation, and that protects our commitment. The reason you say it is for us to understand how much he's done. We should love him because of what he's done. But if we demean what he's done, we get to stay the same. Satan wins. He's twisted the mind. We need to understand the truth of our salvation. He gives us three pictures right here afterwards. And first picture, verse 24. Being justified freely by his grace. Justified is a legal term. It's simply talking about in our salvation. You stand before a judge, and you will be accused by that judge. That judge is either going to find you justified, or he's going to find you condemned. He's going to find you guilty, or he's going to find you acquitted. And so this first picture he rolls out, here it is. Mankind, you are sin. But there is a way, it has been made manifest, that you can stand in front of the judge and instead of hear what you should hear, guilty. Now, we have to picture this. Brother Hamilton, I am standing in front of a judge and I know I'm guilty. I know I deserve the whole sentence. I know there's no way out, and I am simply waiting for him to say, done. And then there is a way made manifest, made possible, where someone says, I will substitute for him. And yes, he is guilty, but I will take the penalty and he will go free. You know how important that person is to me. You know how thankful I am for that person. Well, this isn't a person. This is God himself who sent his son to be the substitution for me that I could go free. That's the picture of justified. I don't hear guilty. I hear go free. Being justified freely by his grace through the redemption. There's another picture. Sin is painted as our slave master. Man, I am dominated. I have no choice in the matter. I have no value. I have no hope. I have no purpose. I have no control. There's no real tomorrow. You know what tomorrow's going to be? Same as today. What is that? I don't know. I'm just going through. I'm not making anybody happy. I'm not getting any response. I am dominated. That's sin. That's what it does to mankind. And the only option is for someone to come and purchase you out of the slave block, off the slave block, which is why Corinthians 6 says we are bought with a price. Because he came and purchased. He redeemed. He redeemed and set free. But the purchase was not a high price. It was the blood of Christ. And that gets to the third picture. Whom God hath set forth to be propitiation. All right, well, here's where it gets. Kent, there's a lot of things I don't understand. Here's one of those things I just don't understand. What we want to do, we want to look and say, all right, I believe in the gospel, so God just overlooks my sin. It's kind of how we want to look at it. Or, I'm a Christian, and I'm weak, and I'm growing, and so, he understands that, and so he overlooks my sin. God can't overlook any sin. It goes against his holiness. But God loves me. He does love you. And that's one of his attributes. He's loving. But he's also just. And all sin must be paid for. There must be a propitiation for that sin. And there's only two possible ways to deal with that sin. One is eternal punishment in hell. The other was paid for by his Son. There is no sin that's overlooked. He came and he paid the price so that we didn't have to. And he defeated death, hell, and the grave. And so, when Satan wants to throw whatever accusation he can, I can stand on his salvation. So he rolls out this picture. You can tell I'm running out of time and pages. He gives us these three pictures. If you start going through the book of Romans, you know what you're going to see after this? You're going to see some of the benefits of this. Here, I'm just going to read them. I'll read them, then, Doc, we're going to ask you to close, all right? Romans chapter 5. Therefore, being justified, what we just got done talking about, by faith, we have peace with God. There you go. You want a benefit? Here's a benefit. We have peace with God. Now, this is where the world says, yes, but the world is such a mess, and if your God was, then the world would be better. No, he never says that. In fact, he says, in the world you will have, it's going to be rough. In fact, later on in this passage, it starts talking about the benefit of those tribulations. In this very same chapter, he says, you'll have peace with me because you're justified. You're not guilty. You stand in front of the judge, knowing I should go, here not guilty. Nothing can happen. Nothing can be done. I'm always not guilty. Peace of God. By whom also we have access. Oh, that access word, that's just a great word. That's like the word like being introduced. That's like when you introduce, I was thinking actually royalty, but this would fit. That's like when you introduce a couple. Let me introduce you the first time. That's boom, go have communion, go have fellowship. Well, this actually is kind of a picture of royalty. King, let me introduce to you Miss Myrna, because she has access and she's going to come in fellowship and talk with you. Which we have. Benefit of our salvation. And not only so, we glory in tribulations. Still in verse 2. By faith is grace wherein we stand, and rejoice in the hope of glory. We also have hope. We have hope of tomorrow. This is not I hope it doesn't rain on the 4th. This is, I know I shall see him, and I will be like he is, and I will sit with the Son on the throne, and we shall be together forever. See, there are benefits to our salvation. We put that helmet on. We think about it, it changes our reactions and it changes our response. You take a person with hope and a person with no hope, and they're going to be totally different things during a day. And we're supposed to be the people who have hope. Doug, you just missing a word of prayer.
Father, we do thank you
goodness. We thank you for salvation, Lord Father, and the fact that